Stanley Kubrick is probably my favourite Hollywood director of all time. Every one of his films is rich, astounding, patient, moving, and visually awe-inspiring. It is no surprise, therefore, that my favourite horror film of all time is The Shining. How this movie unsettles and disturbs the viewer is nothing short of genius. From the cryptic to the outright terrifying, every little detail is worth analysing and discussing. The film is nearly 40 years old, but still finds itself high in the rankings of the best horror movies of all time. And why is that exactly? Well, that's what we're going to discuss today, why it is one of the best. For clarity, this isn't a definitive The Shining Explained video. A lot of the creative decisions that went into this film are deliberately misleading to make the audience baffled and bewildered. And good luck finding any substantial answers in the novel too. I actually compared the two mediums as part of my dissertation on Kubrick alongside A Clockwork Orange. If you fancy giving it a read, I've posted it on my Patreon page for supporters of the channel. The Shining starts out with these magnificent aerial shots of the Torrance family's bright yellow car, driving through never-ending mountains. The length of the sequences makes the viewer aware of just how distant from civilization the family will be when they occupy the hotel for many months. The camera flies as though it were following the car, something the cinematography does many times throughout the film for a variety of reasons. This particular example seems to be hinting at an all-seeing being that has been watching Jack from day one. Another nice little detail of this sequence is that the title credits fly upwards, with the title of the film in the same font style and size as the performers. Perhaps it is not the title that is of concern to Kubrick, and that Shining, the ability to communicate telepathically, is a character in and of itself. Anybody familiar with Kubrick's films will know of his meticulous decision-making, and that oftentimes things are displayed in shot very much intentionally. I find it rather significant, for example, that the first time we see Wendy, she is smoking in front of her child and reading The Catcher in the Rye. I've not read the novel myself, so I can't make any real interpretations. Perhaps you, dear viewer, may have an idea or two. The smoking, however, seems to be indicating some form of negligence towards Danny's upbringing. Back in the mountains, Jack, during the interview, behaves in a relatable manner. He aims to impress that he himself can handle 5 months of isolation, but his wife and child might be another matter. He simply says they'll love it, a rather brief answer, as though he hasn't even asked them, showing more of this idea of negligence towards the family unit. Intriguingly, this character Bill Watson is shown only once during the interview, when the manager begins to describe the incident with Delbert Grady 10 years prior. He is then seen with his arms folded when Jack is on the phone, showing some sort of uncertainty or concern addressed towards the manager. Of course, we don't know what they're discussing, but by placing him in the shot, I get the impression he doubts Jack is suitable for the job. In the book, Watson is the guy who maintains the boiler. Maybe the film wanted to display him like this to instill doubt into the viewer that Jack would be suitable for a menial job like this when his head is in the clouds writing a novel. Even when the Torrances arrive, he seems rather irritant. He is seen standing behind the chair Jack is sitting in as though he doesn't want to interact with him, even following them from the back of the line when the parents get a tour of the hotel. He sighs and reluctantly takes the family's baggage upstairs, with his only line in the film showing nothing but displeasure.
Bill, would you have the Torrances' things brought to their apartment?
Fine. I better collect my family first.
Back in Boulder, Danny is shown talking to Tony in the bathroom mirror. Mirrors play a key role in the film, seemingly to reveal truth in some way. The first instance here has Danny's imaginary friend sending him this vision of a tidal wave of blood, representing the gallons of blood spilt on the grounds of what was once an Indian burial site. When Jack wakes up a month later, he is shown deceptively reflected in the bedroom mirror. What's even weirder about this particular shot is how it boomerangs from the bed to the bedroom and then back again into the mirror. The significance of the mirror, though, is that we see a metaphorical separation of the couple. He's aware of her presence in the room, but his mind is clearly elsewhere. He shoots down any ideas of going for a walk with Wendy, and we cut straight to this shot of the typewriter after the boomerang is complete. This was what was on his his mind the image of the untouched typewriter, where we then see him procrastinating. As the camera pulls out, the typewriter slowly moves out of view, and we see the hotel instead, completely enveloping Jack as he pointlessly bounces a tennis ball off the wall. Not just any wall though, a wall covered in totem poles, as though he's insulting the land the hotel was built upon even further. Back to the mirrors, a later scene in the bedroom shows Jack both on the bed and in the mirror, with Danny sandwiched between the two. Spookily, the trousers on the bed match the positioning of Jack's legs. This shot seems to be indicating a good and bad side to Jack's character. When he is cradled on Jack's lap, Danny looks right into the mirror, as though it allows him to see right through Jack's alter ego. Later at the bar, Jack is shown to be looking into a mirror too, with the audience seeing his reflection in this rather disturbing shot of him wiping his eyes. The mirror may be showing the truth that he's talking to himself and not Lloyd, or even to indicate his alcoholism as he yearns for the bar to be fully stocked. There are two more uses of mirrors later on that reveal more sinister truths than those I've covered so far, and we'll discuss them when we get to those scenes. On the day of arrival, the family are seen driving in their car. Jack describes an instance of people getting deserted in the mountains, forced to eat each other, much to the dismay of his wife. Danny already knows what cannibalism is, however, he saw it on TV. When Jack mimics his son with wide eyes, you can sort of tell he's trying to have a jab at his wife, as though she's just as guilty of putting unsavory thoughts into their son's head as he is. After all, we'd only seen Danny and Wendy in their apartment watching TV together thus far. However, Jack proves to be an awful father when they're shown around their living quarters. Before they go in, he checks out two attractive girls as they are leaving. When the couple are shown Danny's room, he says,
Perfect for a child.
It does seem strange that he says this instead of naming his son, or even saying it'll be perfect for him. You already have these disturbing bubbles brewing from earlier scenes, even before the family are snowed in when the true horror begins. A month in, and we see this shot of Wendy returning to the bedroom after acquiring some breakfast. In this corridor, there are two doors seemingly to the same hotel room. The set design of these corridors would have been meticulous, and a strange inconsistency like this would not have gone unnoticed unless it was deliberate. On the other hand, it might simply be a small cupboard. There are other deliberate inconsistencies in the set design to disorient the viewer, however. Danny cycling around the corridors will make one's head spin. He does a loop around a little section with 3 doors and an elevator. How could you possibly cram 2 rooms into this area that won't even have windows? Besides, who would want to be in a room where they can hear the lift going up and down all night long? Another strange door addition is in the parents' bedroom. In this shot of Jack beckoning Danny to approach, we see a door on the right-hand side of the frame, which would logically lead out into the corridor. This door makes less sense though, because the room is elevated slightly, so this door here and the door in the corridor don't quite match up. Just like in the shot with Wendy, it begs the question, why are there 2 doors to the same room? Another strange addition to the film are these title cards that separate segments of the film. Ordinarily, they would help identify the progression of time, seeing as these characters are due to stay here for a limited time. However, these title cards get more ambiguous as the film goes on. The first is after Danny and Wendy take a walk in the maze. The music gets louder and louder, building up, and then Tuesday? Why Tuesday? There are going to be countless Tuesdays if they're staying here for months, right? The same happens after the snow arrives, and it's Saturday. Did it take 5 days for the snow to arrive? Probably not. The strangest one of all is the final one, 4 p.m. We aren't even getting days or dates anymore. What this progression seems to be showing to me is that the longer time goes on without having systems of orientation, humans cease to function normally. Only the ticking clocks can be used to tell how much time they have left. This idea of isolation is something the film tackles beautifully. Jack yearns for it whilst Wendy loathes loves it. In one scene, she's trying to communicate to somebody, anybody, with this old school radio system that's hooked up. Wendy briefly speaks to somebody on the other end who sadly only functions as a rescue service when needed, not for idle chit-chat. When you have nothing happening and nobody to discuss it with but your reclusive husband and psychic son, you're probably going to go a little insane yourself. The immense size of the hotel presents a maze in itself. This is best portrayed when we see this representation of the maze, more extensive and complicated than what the map presents. Now we come to that infamous twin scene. It starts with the violins shrilly increasing in volume, with Danny cycling around the lower levels of the hotel. Instead of directly following him, however, the camera stays back, showing the vulnerability of this child by displaying him as a tiny speck of the frame. This slight change gives off the impression that we should anticipate something bad is going to happen, and then we cut to a corridor not previously seen. It's similar to the staff wing, but only because of the flooring. The wallpaper, however, is completely different. This new area to the audience, accompanied by the prior build-up, presents the perfect crescendo with what sounds like a gong being hit as the twins come into view. They chant, "Come and play with us," preying on Danny's feelings of loneliness. I'm curious to know whether these images are shown to Danny by the hotel itself, or if it's Tony showing him images to get him out before his dad attempts to murder him. This ambiguity allows for these images to strike the viewer with the intensity that Danny is reacting with. You want to hide your eyes in fright, but the way the images are cut together presents something you can't avoid. You can no longer trust the film to show you reality because we share Danny's vision. This lingering shot of Danny slowly uncovering his eye builds up the anticipation that we'll see these horrific twins again. The music fades out with Danny reassured by his invisible friend that what he's seeing isn't real, still retaining that ambiguity of who exactly sent him the vision. The next segment of the film starts out with a tennis ball rolling into Danny's play area and ends with him being found with a bruise on his neck. There's enough time for whoever rolled it to slip back into room 237 and be unseen by the camera. Note how this may be the same tennis ball that Jack was throwing against the wall earlier on. Instead of verbally communicating an invitation to play, we see it physically manifested instead. When Danny goes into the room, we see it from his point of view, fading into the boiler room. Fades like this normally indicate that some amount of time passes before the next scene takes place. In that time, Jack could have potentially injured his son and fallen asleep. When we see him asleep at the desk, there's no paper or anything, so he obviously wasn't writing. Strangely as well, it's Wendy who is examining the boiler despite it being Jack's occupation, another example of Jack being a terrible husband. The more pressing matter takes precedence, however, with this long shot of Danny center framed, slowly entering this giant foyer with his thumb in his mouth. Jack doesn't even respond to the accusation, just as silent as his son. Wendy does all the talking. What I love though is that we see this shot of him in shock, and then we cut back after she's taken Danny away. He looks angry. This then evolves and affects his entire body when he thrusts around maniacally with his arms as he approaches the gold room. After Jack gets his bourbon on the rocks, he says,
"White man's burden, Lloyd, my man. White man's burden."
I believe Jack is alluding to a spiritual battle against the long-dead spirits of the Indians, as though it's his duty to keep the dead at bay. Jack might believe he's embodying a long-dead janitor, also indicated by the ending shot, for he speaks to this long-dead bartender that he was the best of the best. Next on the agenda, we have this really odd shot of Halloran's feet watching a news report of the snowstorm on TV in his Florida hotel room. As the camera zooms zooms out, we also see two lights next to the TV with a near-nude portrait right above it. Almost the exact same thing is seen on his bed. This honestly is one of the weirdest and most overlit hotel rooms I've ever seen, and I can only take one thing from this design: the colour orange. If there's one untranslatable detail from novel to film, it smells. In the book, whenever Halloran shines, he can tell it's coming on by a strong smell of oranges. The portrait above Halloran's head has an orange background, an indication of the shining that's about to take place between himself and Dani. Presumably communication is also taking place between the pair when he is on the plane, as it is also plastered with orange. Later on as well, when he's driving towards the hotel, patrol officers are seen in orange reflective jackets, the urgency and danger of his situation increasing by having the camera linger on this accident on the side of the road. I've gotta say, the use of spittle in this movie is great. Jack drools when waking from his nightmare. Something about the lack of control over one's own bodily fluids unsettles me, which certainly seems to be the case with Jack in the bathroom of room 237. I liked this little portrait of a fox placed before the bathroom, almost as though it's guarding it. The mint green colour of the bathroom radiates sterilization, another mask hiding the festering wounds this apparition possesses. The beats of this scene are hit alongside the score, with the rising sound as the girl in the tub reaches for the curtain and the falling sound is heard as she reveals herself to Jack. The music alters again and we hear shrieks of high-pitched sounds, warning of the ill fate awaiting Jack should his temptations get the better of him, which they do. Only when Jack looks in the mirror does he and we see the reality of the situation. He is being psychologically punished for attempting to make love to a woman other than his wife. His body seems to have a mind of its own now, and this lack of control is ultimately where the mocking lies, in the terrifying laughter of the most hideous depiction of a rotting woman you could possibly imagine. It's incredible that Jack won't admit to being haunted by what he saw in the room. Maybe he is too ashamed to admit what he was about to do, and admitting to fear would make him lose control of his family too. Dani hears his parents' conversation from another room, but it's echoed like he's somewhere far away and not merely in the next room. It indicates a growing distance between the conversation and where his mind is being led to. Visions of red rum and the bleeding elevator that his parents have no idea are coming. Another great transformation of Jack's face from confusion to anger comes after Wendy suggests taking Dani away. Dani's facial expression has altered from wide eyes to outright terror here. A change that is slight, but because it is so briefly shown, it is instilled in the viewer's mind. I love when Jack storms out. He's obviously looking at Dani's bedroom with loathing, as though he knows he's being heard. He makes his way back to the gold room for a drink, and there's a spectacular amount of extras in this scene, but the sound is cunningly deceptive. Voices are barely heard, no clinking of drinks or background noises really, even the music is somewhat muffled. It's eerily quiet for what you would expect of a crowded room containing a party. After getting avocat on his jacket, Jack's taken into a bathroom painted with bright red, mixing the luxurious wealth with blood and anger. The red tidal wave of blood we saw earlier seems to have completely soaked this bathroom. We see a similar thing happen at the end of the film when Wendy is running through the hotel in search of Dani, finding a totally red-soaked corridor. Grady, the not quite janitor Jack sees here, is deceptively named too. Why would the boiler man be serving drinks? This is where Jack accuses Grady of chopping up his wife and children and blowing his own brains out, but I think what this scene is trying to do is show Grady as a puppet of the hotel, as though the mean-spirited janitor is doomed to repeat his murderous spree for eternity. This is a direct message from the hotel to Jack about Dani trying to get Halloran into the hotel via his shining abilities. It is only briefly that we hear the voice of the actual Grady, who corrects his children and his wife for not wanting to stay in the hotel forever and ever and ever. Before Wendy finds Jack's writings, her head seemingly grows out of the typewriter. Another creepy thing is that the camera doesn't allow us to see Wendy physically turn the paper. It merely cuts to a close-up of the paper as though the machine is scrolling on its own. What I find really cool is how these papers are written in different literary styles. The words are the same each time, but some are written in poetic formats, others like a movie script. The rushed nature of the writing too instills discomfort. He evidently wrote this all in a fit of rage, not caring for accuracy, and yet took the time to indent and format several of them. Jack then appears to haunt Wendy. He appears on screen as a sliding silhouette, smoother than if he was stepping into the shot. The pair aren't seen in the same shot again for the rest of the scene, the camera jumping back and forth between following and retreating from the two characters. One who wants the best for their child, the other who wants the best for all of them financially. Present and future concerns provide the conflict for this couple. We also have Danny communicating to Halloran through this segment, indicated by the little bit of orange jumper he wears. Then the couple are shown in the shots together again, Jack returning to the haunting silhouette whilst Wendy climbs the metaphorical high ground, which wins her this small victory against Jack by knocking him down the stairs. The centralized shot of Jack's unconscious body has Wendy pressed into the side, as though an uncontrollable force of nature has infected her as well, protecting her child from danger. This long sequence is exemplary of the monotonous filming process Kubrick would undertake to get his actors as hysterical as possible. It's clear from their performances they would have been practicing night and day to get the most insidious performances out of them, and boy was that achieved. With Jack locked in the kitchen store cupboard, we see Wendy reacting to what she has just done. The man she depended on has been transformed so radically that she cannot even believe what she has had to resort to. Picking up the knife brings her to the floor, putting her hand on her head where she whacked Jack. Through their unity of marriage, she feels his pain also. Jack then plays on this sympathy factor, trying to be petty and lovable from his voice and words. However, his body says otherwise, presented by the camera filming him from a seriously disorienting angle, as though it were ready to catch his saliva at any moment. When Jack talks to Grady in the pantry, tins of something with red Indian labels are shown behind him. This reminds us not only of the Indian burial ground on which the hotel was built, but also the racism of those long dead, like the ghost of Grady. This is the last chance for Jack to correct his family, with Tony somehow learning about Jack's mystery escape. He takes over Danny with that sinister voice, making those visions shown earlier a reality. In order to once again reveal the truth of the situation, a mirror is used to warn Wendy of what's about to come knocking at her door. This particular mirror's function is now fulfilled, and these iconic zooms really instantiate the fear into the two characters hiding in their room, amplified by the sudden yet familiar rattling music. Jack then smashes his way into the room, with Danny slipping through the bathroom window. I love this shot of Danny alone against the ominous backdrop of the hotel. Beyond it are the grey wastes. He has nowhere to run to. I also love the way the camera slingshots itself with every axe blow, following the edge with such precision it makes every slam, smash and crash impactful to the eyes and ears. I know a lot of people give this actress crap for her seemingly over-the-top performance, but when you think about how much time went into making the actors hysterical to get these extreme performances, you get facial expressions and delivery of lines so iconic that no horror film has lived up to since. The shots get to such close proximity of the door that the axe head seems to come right at the viewer. Jack then shrugs off a shard of wood from his arm as though he were doing simple lumberjack work, also complemented by his costume, and the scene is completed by this astounding close-up on his face. Jack Nicholson ad-libbed his famous "Here's Johnny" line here, taken from The Tonight Show. The crescendo of the scene introduces the new Jack, the murderer Jack, the hotel Jack, like Johnny, hiding in wait behind a curtain and now coming out to entertain the audience, or possibly even the spirits of the dead. This intense action is interrupted by the arrival of Halloran, and suddenly the only thing we hear are footsteps, Halloran's voice, and the cold, biting wind outside. We follow Jack initially as he climbs a set of stairs, and we get a good long look at what he sees. The red pillared reception area where his journey began and Halloran's will end. Jack is in here somewhere is what this long, slow shot tailing Halloran seems to indicate to me. What's great though is we don't see the stairs Jack was standing on until a good while into the shot. When they do come into full view, I found my eyes glued to the right half of the screen, Jack's location being honed in on despite being out of view. Instead of a traditional jump scare, we hear Jack gasp and then scream, killing Halloran on the spot. Only when this close-up of the injury appears do we hear the rattling music, horrifically combined with Danny and Halloran's screaming. A layering of sounds that come one after the other, building up the horror before fading with this empty shot, and Jack ominously rising, proving that the transformation of man to killer is now complete. The sound of voices, what I interpret to be the voices of the dead, are now heard. We saw images of blood pouring out of the elevator to show this idea visually. Now we hear it. Wendy then climbs the stairs looking for Danny, where several framed paintings are seen on the walls and even on the floor. This one painting of a dark night resembles the darkness outside, which Danny has been forced to hide in. The rushing water of voices is heard again, and we are shown what I interpret to be a previous horrific encounter in the past, now returning to frighten Wendy. In the book, there are more details outlining the hotel's previous experiences with sexual deviance amongst staff and guests, especially those of nobility and wealth. Here, I think we are seeing Wendy placed in the position of a previous woman that stayed at the hotel, essentially catching her husband receiving fellatio from a staff member dressed up as a bear. Of course, this makes no sense to Wendy, but the horror and betrayal experienced by somebody in the past is shown again to her in this strange, ghostly way. When Jack chases Danny in the maze, the camera follows behind him in a similar fashion to when he was riding his bike. The camera points at the floor to show the footprints, and even a close-up on Danny's shoes is shown kicking up the snow. With Jack befuddled by his son's retreading steps, the camera is then positioned on the front of Danny. His mother takes him away in the snowmobile with a cloud of snow blowing over, and Jack is left screaming in a primal fashion. No words are left for this vessel of a human being. As he fails to live up to the hotel's expectations, he is left for dead in the snow. As proof of taking care of the hotel, Jack joins the dead, with him at the forefront of these photographs, celebrating his time at the Overlook Hotel. Thanks for watching. Comment your thoughts below or chat with us on the Discord server, where we will continue this discussion.